Welcome to the Gearbox. Join us today as we shift through the gears.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Gearbox. This is your host, Chris, and it's another Winched Out Wednesday. Today, I want to talk about something that I think will get under most people's skin, and this is going to be manufacturer defects and recalls. And when does enough become enough? When do enough failures become enough failures to constitute recalling a vehicle and assisting the consumer, if you will? Because as I have torn into my vehicle to try to diagnose the issues that I've been suffering since the last mudding excursion, I have found out that the codes that were thrown told me that I need to change out my OBD2. I need to change out my O2 sensors. So slap the scanner on the OBD2, ran the codes on the vehicle, came back O2 sensors, pulled the old O2s. Now I will say this: the upstream O2 sensors on a third gen Toyota Tacoma are probably the easiest upstream O2 sensors anyone will ever have to change. I'll say this: if you've got a crow's foot socket or an O2 sensor socket and enough extensions, anyone can change this out. And I don't say that lightly, because there are a lot of other easier things that you could probably do. I would say changing your oil on your Tacoma is harder than changing the upstream O2 sensors. Haven't done the downstreams yet. By the way, this episode is going to be a third gen Tacoma heavy episode. But bear with me, because I will also be discussing just manufacturer recalls. And I think we can all kind of take a similar stance on this. So I swapped out the O2 sensors, went through, cleaned out the whole air intake system. This is again after mudding. Cleaned out the air box, put a brand new air filter in it. Shout out to K&N. You guys make awesome products. Inspected everything from the air box back to the throttle body. Didn't see any excessive moisture. Didn't find anything out of the normal. There was a little bit of carbon buildup right at the butterfly in the throttle body. Nothing too serious. So gave that a quick clean out. Disconnected the battery. Didn't have my scanner at the time to clear the codes. These also weren't hard codes. Reconnected the battery. Check engine light went away. Codes were soft clear, if you will. And took the truck for a test drive. Now remember, the codes that I got were bad possible O2 sensors. Upon inspection of the factory O2 sensors, which the truck was made in 2017, bought it in 2018. I've been driving it ever since. So, 5 years. O2 sensors didn't look bad. Truck passed smog the year before, so I wasn't really too worried about that. But I figured that's what the code said. I'll switch them out anyways. The O2 sensors were $120, probably again the cheapest set of O2 sensors I've ever purchased, and these were from Rock Auto. I probably could have got some AC Delcos or whatever AutoZone or O'Reilly's would have thrown at me. But Rock Autos were just cheaper. I had them here the next day. I think the job took me a total of, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes to do left and right side. So I took the truck for a test drive. Still had the same issue. Around 3,000 RPMs, truck was falling flat on its face. Then it would sputter, and it would search for a gear, and it would pick a gear, and it would take off again. And sometimes I could get RPMs above 3,000, and the truck would still accelerate. But when it gets around 4,500, 5,000 RPMs, the truck just falls flat on its face. It's literally like someone either stuffed a rag into the intake, or you just cut the fuel, which the fuel filter might be my next go-to, just because it is acting like it could be a clogged fuel filter. But there's also a hidden issue that seems to be plaguing early third gens. And when I say early third gens, I'll say 2016, 2017, 2018, maybe. I think after 2018, like 2019 and up, it seems like Toyota has finally addressed this problem. What can happen is the crankshaft position sensor fails. We all know if the crankshaft position sensor fails, everything kind of goes out of whack. Everything does go out of whack. If you can't time the crank, then valve timing can get thrown off, which one of the codes was also valve timing was off. But there was no crankshaft position sensor code, which I think is odd. So I did the dirty detail of diving into the forums for you guys. This one I will say was probably one of the easier searches I've done. Although it was funny because as I was searching through this forum, there was definitely some shots fired from some guys just basically saying like, well, my truck runs perfectly fine and I've got nobody cares. And other folks were calling that out, and I think it's hilarious. I tend to try not to leave comments in forums strictly for that reason. I tend not to even post in forums if I can avoid it. But sometimes the community has an answer, and usually there's already an answer for your question, which I was actually, again, surprised to see that there was an immediate answer for this. Hopped on Google, typed in the symptoms, truck struggles to accelerate, truck struggles to maintain speed, truck sputters and dies. Well, truck sputters, and then it goes into a limp mode, essentially. First thing that popped up was the CPS, crankshaft position sensor. And here's where it gets fun. So again, this is for the 3rd gen Tacomas, and again, I would say early 3rd gen Tacomas, not the later 3rd gens. Maybe could be, I'm not too sure. It looks like people had contacted Toyota about this. And these sensors, from what it sounds like, are kind of a hit and miss failure. They'll go out, they can go out at 1,000 miles, they can go out at 80,000 miles. My truck has, I think, 71,000 miles on it right now. And, per a lot of the last episodes, you guys know that I really try to stay on my maintenance with the vehicle. Which now I'm kind of, I don't want to say this is Toyota's fault because I did run the truck through mud. And I know that mud can wreak havoc on your vehicle. This isn't the first time I've taken my truck out in some nasty conditions. Not this Toyota specifically, but other vehicles, and just had other things fail. So I know that, going through mud, you're prone to fail more often than not. And I think even if you have like a really well-built rig, it's just going to happen, especially vehicles that are laden with sensors. And that's why I had that quick podcast, kind of 8 minutes short, the other day, just kind of going over warning lights and warning alarms. And somebody actually made a good comment. I liked this. They had said, in today's age, it's kind of silly that we're not able to just pull our codes from one of the display screens in any of the vehicles that we drive. I don't understand. I do understand cases for having an OBD2 connection and having to scan the vehicle. There is a lot of sensitive data that can be pulled from there. But also just being able to check the code kind of by getting into the ECU, ECM would be nice. I don't think that'll ever be a thing. It'd be nice. Moving forward. So, took the truck out for a test drive, had the same results, put it back in the garage, hopped onto the forum, looked up what the problem could be on the forum. Turns out this is a very common problem, and it also turns out that Toyota doesn't want to address the problem in the earlier vehicles. I don't know why. I would maybe assume that because this isn't a plaguing problem that plagues the whole community, maybe it is, or the fact that maybe it's not a huge safety hazard to where, because the vehicle will go into limp mode, you can still pull off the highway. But I am surprised that Toyota is not addressing this or making people more aware of it. It's kind of one of those you're just going to find out kind of situations. And you're going to find out probably at the worst possible time, because a lot of the things I was reading was guys were on road trips. They were a couple hundred miles away from home. There were a few people that had just rolled off the lot after a service and this happened. So again, like I said, this is a hit and miss issue that can happen at any point in time. I would dare say that maybe it's worth investing keeping a spare crankshaft position sensor on your vehicle if you have a third gen. And I'll get into this. I'll get into reasons why. So I want to start off with poor placement. And I'll throw up some photos and a quick little video, because I think everybody should kind of know where this is, especially if this is a continuing problem. So I will say this: it's in a very easy place to service. Similarly, as easy as doing the upstream O2 sensors. However, where it's located, in comparison to modifying your vehicle, you can end up with some issues. I say this because I have the wide body kit, the advanced fiberglass wide body kit on my truck. The body kit's not the problem. It's the problem is you have to remove the fender well splash guard, which exposes a lot of those sensitive areas to more of the elements than what it would be if you didn't have to remove that. Next to that, you have the secondary kind of splash guard that protects the engine bay. And if you're just using that to protect your engine bay, then you a lot of it's going to be exposed, right? The fender well splash guard really protects more of your airbox and intake than it does these splash guards that are kind of behind the suspension. But I would say that they probably do help a bit, at least for containment purposes. Because I will say this, I will find mud and dirt and contamination all over my engine since I'm lacking those inner fender splash guards. So the CPS sensor, the crankshaft position sensor, is literally, if you turn your wheels to the left, it will be in behind the passenger side tire at the back of the motor. You can see it literally where the chassis drops down. You'll see a set of like heat blanketed, looks like tubing, but that's actually wires to the wiring harness. And those connect right to the CPS. So, well, what issue does this present you? Okay, well, you got to remove the tire to access this. And one of the reasons why I'm talking about this is because this is something that could leave you stuck where you have to recover yourself. Because you do basically have a hit and miss throttle. And if you're out mudding, if you're out rock crawling, even if you're on a service road, this could plague you. It could leave you stranded on the side of the road. I would say you could probably drive on lit mode, but if you're 50, 60, 70 miles out from a service center or even from any kind of auto parts store, and that's if that auto parts store is going to have the sensor in stock, you could find yourself like up shit's creek without a boat. Paying a lot of money for a tow. I mean, you could try to hoof it back. A lot of the guys that I read were still able to kind of like hoof it back. Even when this happened to me, I was still able to do highway speeds for probably about 65, 70 miles. The truck did drive, but you just can't give it any gas. So if you're trying to accelerate on the freeway, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt. So it's a balance, right? I mean, you can limp home on this. You can still kind of do highway speeds. In my vehicle specifically, because I have the auto trans. And it might be happen in manuals too, but it did flip off the traction control at lower speeds. And then as soon as I got up to highway speeds, the traction control did re-engage. So you're going through this whole kind of like weird event when this happens. So now you need to disconnect the wiring harness from the crankshaft position sensor. Well, the problem is Toyota used, I think, like an 18 gauge, I would say even maybe a 20 gauge wire. It's a really small gauge wire. And then they put this big rubber boot over the top of the plug. So you have to pinch the connection through probably a 2 mil, 3 mil thick rubber boot. And the way they did this too also exposes the back of the wiring harness to a lot of the elements. And I'll get into that after this explanation. So you got to pinch that connection, pull the connector off without separating or tearing those wires from the plug. And then you can access the CPS. Now, some guy said they just disconnected the CPS and then disconnected it from the harness. that might be an easier way to do this. However, you don't really have a whole lot of wiggle room because the length of harness you have to work with is probably about 6 inches. And again, that's covered in a heat protective shroud with a lot of electrical tape and a really thick rubber boot. So kind of weigh your options. Now that I did it, I think I probably would disconnect the CPS first and then unplug it. So a common problem that happens with this, and I read it through the forum. I thought it was the only one that happened to me. I was like, oh, my luck. Shit. I just ripped the wires out of the back of the plug. And that happened. I mean, there's 3 wires. It's, positive ground and a signal wire. It's going to be red, black, and green. I'll go ahead, if you guys want, in another episode or maybe in the comments below, I can go ahead and throw that wiring diagram in there if this has happened to anybody else. So those wires disconnected. I was able to get the plug off. I haven't pulled the CPS out yet. But you can order this wiring harness. And I think that's the funniest part. You can order the plug with the wiring harness from Toyota ready to go. And you basically would just, I'm going to use a solder heat shrink butt connection to keep moisture out for one. I'll slip the plug back over, although I don't want to, but hopefully for extra protection, this will work. And then I'm going to try to I don't know if I'm going to do this. I'm going to go in on the back of the plug and I'm going to chase those wires with, I'll probably start with dielectric grease to inhibit moisture and contaminants from getting in there. Because when I pulled the plug off and I saw the wires had separated, sure, there was no contamination between the sensor, crankshaft position sensor, and the plug. That rubber seal inside there kept all the connecting points bone dry. But the wires and where they fed into the back of the plug, covered in mud. I would almost say that the amount of moisture going through a lot of the puddles that I had driven through had just forced water into what's supposed to be a pretty moisture tight area. So I'm a little surprised that I found that, and I'm not too happy because even on the back of the plug, I mean, there's dirt. Hopefully in one of these photos that I took, you'll be able to see that in the rubber boot, just covered in mud, right? So this is supposed to be an area that inhibits moisture and dirt from getting back there, and it almost seems to trap it. So I'm wondering if maybe moisture had caused the crankshaft position sensor to fail. I wonder if maybe moisture had caused it to throw a code. Maybe the sensor's still good. I'm gonna play around with that when I change this out. So I'll let you guys know in a future episode about how that worked. But in my experience, if you're going to buy one, buy two. That way you've got the replacement and the spare. What I had heard is that Toyota, and this isn't a knock on Toyota. This happens across all manufacturers. Sometimes it's cost savings. Sometimes it's just bad for the manufacturer. Sometimes there's so many different reasons that things like this can happen. So this was addressed to Toyota. Toyota didn't really seem to care. It was one of those like, well, bring your vehicle in and fix it. And we all know that, you pay for Toyota service. Some of their stuff is cheap. Some of their stuff isn't. I know every time I've gone in for an oil change and a basic service, I'm out like $150. I also get my tires rotated every time. The last time I went and had my transmission serviced and flushed, that cost me like $400. So, right, it's what you pay for to keep your truck running. If you can flush your auto trans at home, do it at home. Save yourself $1. I'm not here to tell you what to do. All I'm telling you is that there's things that you can find that are going to go wrong. And if I can help you guys at all by presenting this, then hey, there it is. So I'm in a wiring harness. I think that was like $6, or the plug with the wires preset. I did buy some extra wires in case I want to change things up, or in case it's just the plug boot, which if that's the case, I'll have 2 plugs, and maybe I'll just make a spare plug just in case this happens again. But the nice thing is from the look of the end of the plug and it looked like it comes with wires set, which should give me some extra length to work with. Another one of the biggest things I noticed is this plug. Again, you have like 6 inches of wire, and it's gonna stick. I mean, it's in one of the hottest part of the areas in the motor. It's right above the exhaust. It is against the block. And you're gonna get oil and grease and grime and dirt, and it's gonna make that connection stick. So it's gonna be one of those. Even if you do get the clip disconnected as you pull back, it's gonna want to jerk off, and you could probably end up breaking it. So this is a notorious issue. Like I said, it's been plaguing the third gens. So as I go through the repair, I will try to record it and make a short episode on kind of the fix and how I managed to do the replacement. I would try to solder the connection together and shrink it. But again, just because the workable area in there, I think I'm just adding more work to my plan. So like I said, I'll use solder heat shrink butt connections for this cable for the plug end. I'll put the boot back over, chase behind the connection points or the wire points with some dielectric grease, swap out the crankshaft position sensor, and hopefully this fixes the truck. My fingers are crossed, because after that it's going to be mass airflow sensor and fuel filter. I did notice that it did say low fuel pressure. I don't know if that's just due to the CPS malfunctioning, or if it was due to the O2 sensors throwing a code. So the truck, like I said, the truck currently feels like it either has no air or no fuel at about 3,000 RPMs. So I think the total cost for this, the plug plus the extra wires plus the CPS, you're out like $120. Depends on what crankshaft position sensor you get. Again, I might go to AutoZone and get an AC Delco brand, or I don't really know if I want to do that. I'll probably order again off Rock Auto, because there's a couple other varieties and options. It is nice because they do have like economy and daily driver. The truck's not really a daily driver, but I guess in my opinion and belief, the daily driver products I feel would last longer than like economy. Who knows if there's even a difference at all. So with that being said, I guess that comes down to like addressing manufacturer recalls and paying attention to possible recalls that can come up, because I know myself, this Tacoma and even my daily drive that I used to get to work, my Golf, I haven't even done an inspection or a check from the manufacturer on any recalls. I don't think anybody really does, unless you get like a letter in the mail saying, hey, there's a factory recall, bring your vehicle in for inspection. So I would definitely say this: with the purchase of a new vehicle, within the first 5 years of owning it, if you're going to own your vehicle for that long, definitely check the manufacturer's websites and see if there are any recalls that are out there. Save yourself a ton of money and time. And I know a lot of these recalls, especially like big safety hit recalls, the manufacturer has to handle free of charge. Some, I think, would argue that you're over your powertrain warranty, or you're over your this, that, or the other, whatever warranties you have or extended warranties you have. For the most part, any recall I think should be covered by the manufacturer. So definitely take the time, go to these websites, or even just type in, the year, make, and model of your vehicle and recall on Google, and see everything pops up. Again, this wasn't a recall from Toyota. They didn't post anything about it. A lot of the people in the forums. Oh, by the way, when I checked the forums on this, it's still current. I mean, I'm seeing posts from late 2021 to mid 2022. So it looks like this is a problem that's starting to appear it's pretty common. It's coming up a lot again on the older third gen Tacomas. But then again, even if it's coming up in mid 2022 to late 2022 into 23, that means it's also affecting the later model Tacomas. I don't know if Toyota's producing a better crankshaft position sensor, if maybe they just have a flawed batch, or if the CPS from them just comes bad. I would assume that if that's the case, like off the line, probably the first thing you're going to want to do for a total charge of like $50 is just go buy a new CPS or keep a spare on you. It's one 10 millimeter bolt, pops out of the right side of the block, again, right above the exhaust. You'll see it again just on the passenger side. If you follow the chassis, kind of where it drops down, you'll see it right there. And then that way, if it does happen, if your truck starts to sputter or can't get above 3,000 RPMs, or if it does and then it dies, and again, this is for a 3rd gen Tacoma, then more than likely it's that. Again, I don't have any codes that are representing it being the CPS, which I think is strange. But it doesn't mean that it's not. It's not going to rule it out. So I'm going to get into that. Hopefully the parts show up this week. That way, come Sunday, I can maybe give you guys an update as to if I got it fixed or not. It does suck because I've been down for 2 weeks. I mean, I guess it's kind of nice because it's snowing out and most of the trails are closed. Definitely going to be avoiding mud in all future cases because this sucks. So with that being said, guys, I want to thank you for joining me on another episode of the Gearbox and Winched Out Wednesdays. I haven't been checking the Gearbox email. I will get around to that hopefully, and maybe answer some comments and questions that could be left there. But for the most part, things I do check commonly are my Instagram, and you can hop on my website and email me directly. That is Tacoma Tactical, Tacoma Space Tactical on Instagram, or TacomaTacticalUS.com. If you guys are interested in what I've done for my build so far, you can find a lot of the parts that I purchased for the vehicle, kind of in the purchase section. Stay tuned for wheeling events and updates. Hopefully I'm going to try to get on there and do like weather tracking and trails that are open and closed, especially like in the Utah area, especially north of Utah area where I'm at, because I do know I've gone out and I've tried to see if trails are open or closed, and that's kind of hit and miss. I do know a lot of the trails out here close as soon as the snow falls. So it'd be nice to know like when they open back up. So I'll try to get that posted up there. And with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you for listening and not burning the clutch. Join us again later this week for another episode of the Gearbox.